use the policy rate marginally and cites favorable outlook for the economy among key drivers. And President of the Association of Bank Treasurers and Currency Dealers, ACI, Amar Gati, is assuring businesses not to panic over the recent significant depreciation of the Ghana cedi, saying measures by the central bank will bring more dollar inflows to correct the situation. These are the headlines and plus other stories coming up on this evening's edition of Business Live. My name is Emmanuel Boaji. We are here once again, and you can always stay interactive with us by tweeting at Joy Business GH is our handle, and on Facebook we are on Joy Business. We're taking a short break. The details coming up.
Business Live today is brought to you by GCB Bank.
Thanks for staying. Now, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana has decided to reduce the policy rate marginally. The committee dropped the rate by 50 basis points to 25.5%. This is the first time since June 2011 that the bank has reduced its policy rate, which often influences cost of credit. Addressing journalists after a meeting to review the health of the economy, Governor Dr. Abdul Nasiru Ishahaku said the action was influenced by a favorable outlook for the economy.
The outlook for inflation is broadly positive, as reflected in the continued decline in the underlying inflation, stability in the foreign exchange market, low aggregate demand conditions, and general high real interest rates. Growth conditions remain weak and below trend. This is underpinned by weak global demand, declining commodity prices, and disruptions in the production of oil and gas. Other factors include weak private sector credit growth as a result of the tight credit stance and fiscal consolidation efforts. These tight conditions are expected to prevail in the outlook. With these considerations, ladies and gentlemen, the committee concluded that the downside risks to growth outweigh the risk to inflation, and therefore decided to reduce the policy rate by 50 basis points to 25.5%.
Meanwhile, economist Professor Peter Quartey has been assessing the implications of the reduction in the policy rate on the economy and also for businesses. He spoke on the market, please.
I think it is, especially in an election year, given that we are in the last round of few days towards the elections. Normally, and also towards Christmas, you see a lot of demand for foreign exchange, you see a lot of economic activity, spending, and the rest. But so far, the inflation rate, the exchange rate movement have been quite stable, I must admit. So I think it's in line with this, that a reduction or a in the policy rate is quite acceptable at this point. We have to be a bit cautious, though, because sometimes it is after the elections, perhaps the first quarter of 2017, that we see some of the numbers, the real numbers. But for now, I think compared to previous years, we've managed to contain inflation and exchange rate movement bank rates, lending rates, etc., depends on several other factors, including the policy rate, the default rate, for instance, and many other factors, their cost of operation. So it depends on what proportion, how significant. This is quite marginal. So it's very unlikely that you see any major change coming from the banks. I think the default rate and other factors are quite significant.
Now, the public debt has reached a little over 112 billion cedis as of September this year. This was contained in the latest financial and economic data released by the Bank of Ghana, but there appears to be some discrepancies in the real margin of growth in the debt numbers. George Yafi tells us more.
The Bank of Ghana's report ending November shows that from July to September, the debt numbers have gone up by 6.2 billion cedis. However, when you look at the same Bank of Ghana's report released ending September, the growth over the past 2 months was 2.6 billion Ghana cedis. This is because the amount quoted by the Central Bank for the public debt in their previous report as of July was 109.8 billion Ghana cedis. However, when you look at the latest report, the bank says the debt as of July was 106.2 billion cedis. Attempts to get clarity from those who are responsible for the debt numbers have been difficult. However, a source close to the Bank of Ghana says their figures are based on numbers given to them from the Ministry of Finance, so they cannot be held responsible. But if you go with the November report, then the 112 billion cedis public debt accounts for about 67% of the total value of the economy. That is the debt-GDP ratio. For some, the current development could mean that Ghana is likely to meet the IMF's end-of-year target of debt-GDP ratio of 66%. This could influence the rating agencies to review Ghana's creditworthiness to a favorable position.
Now, President of the Association of Bank Treasurers and Currency Dealers, ACI, Amagati, has assured businesses not to panic over the recent significant depreciation of the Ghana cedi, saying measures by the central bank will bring more dollar inflows to correct the situation. In an interview with Joy Business, Amagati was optimistic the central bank's measures, including the directive for exporters to repatriate their profits into the country, as well as their other options, will help stabilize the cedi.
No need for panic. There isn't. Like I said, with the FX auctions coming up, we'll see more inflows. You know, also, Bank of Ghana made it such that all those exporters repatriate their proceeds back into the country. Initially, we didn't see so much of that, but I think that is starting to pick up. That should increase the inflows that are coming. If the supply starts improving, we'll see some stability on the market. There's no need to panic.
Explain to me how this whole auction thing that you're talking about is going to work out. You're going to start from the end of November. How is it going to work out? Which you believe that it would have an impact on the Ghana cedi?
Okay, so the central bank is going to make it such that banks will bid for FX from them. And they are using the Reuters platform in doing this. So if they come onto the market and they say, we have this amount on the market, and then all banks are to bid their price for it. So I think with that, we'll see more inflows coming into the market. If they have, you know, there were talks about the cocoa money coming straight to commercial banks. However, are the banks ready to take that amount of FX? No, I wouldn't say we are. If it goes to the central bank and is auctioned back into the market, I believe we'll have the necessary inflows we need to cater for the demand that we are seeing now. So that should be able to stabilize them.
You're still on Business Live. Let's take a break here. We'll be back.
Business Live today was brought to you by GCB Bank.
You don't have change? Oh, madam! Madam! Oh! Madam!
lose valuable business? Receive payments instantly on GCB Light Pay with Ainifesa, MasterCard, GH Link, or GCB Ready Cash Card. You can pay with GCB Light Pay even in the remotest of places. No need for cash or waiting for change. Get paid with ease and stay in control. GCB Light Pay. No long things.
The die is cast. The parties seeking your vote have made their manifestos known. But how do they address your needs as a voter in securing jobs, reducing poverty, and income inequalities in Ghana? Let your voice be heard. Your election headquarters, Joy News, is handing over the microphone to you, the voter, to critique the manifestos of the various political parties ahead of the December 7 poll, Monday, November 21, at the University of Ghana Wetlands Auditorium at 4 p.m. We'll be live on Joy News on TV and radio. The Election Manifesto Dialogues is brought to you by your election headquarters, Joy News, with support from UNICEF Ghana.
Thank you very much for staying, but unfortunately we would like to end Business Live here because ahead of election 2016, Joy News and UNICEF holds a program on poverty and inequality at the University of Ghana. We're taking you right away to the University of Ghana where Evans Mensah is standing by for the program.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the University of Ghana. Tonight, we're going to have a discussion on poverty and inequality. For those of you watching this on the Joy News channel, you can see the banner right behind us. That's the conversation we are going to have, the way forward. But it's situated within the context of the manifestos that we've seen already. The conversations that we know around poverty and inequality have been going on for a while. So how exactly are the various manifestos seeking to tackle poverty and inequality? This program is made possible through the kindness courtesy of UNICEF, and they are making this conversation a reality on the University of Ghana campus. And this is a follow-up, really, to a conversation we started early on in the year following a big meeting in Accra where several key points were agreed on as far as inclusive development, dealing with poverty and inequality are concerned. Months on, we have 15 or so days to the elections. Conversations have already gone on. The parties, I recall in that conversation at Best Western Hotel, we had party representatives there making commitments to deal with poverty and inequality. Okay. Now, the manifestos emerged. We're going to scrutinize to see to what extent did they meet those commitments that they made to deal with poverty and inequality and also ensure inclusive development. With me to look at these very interesting, very important issues as we go into a very important election. First, Dr. Yao Graham is with the Third World Network. Doc, thank you very much for joining us here on the University of Ghana campus.
Thank you.
Also with us tonight is a man I'm sure you all know. Dr. Charles Abugri is, of course, the boss of SADA. And he joins us here because, of course, if you look at the Savannah Accelerated Development Authority, what they are supposed to do essentially I mean, to put it simply, to reduce that gap, that poverty and inequality gap that we've always talked about. I mean, put it in stark terms between the North and the South. But has that happened? What can we do to ensure that becomes a realization? That's why he is here. Again, putting it within the broad frameworks and proposals that we've seen going into 2017. And of course, this is a conversation about inclusive development. There's no way we can have this conversation without making sure that at least we have genderly sensitive. And that is why Edith Asamani, of course, who's been talking about these issues and dealing with it, she's here on her own merit. He's a youth activist. A round of applause for Edith, ladies and gentlemen. So my name is Evan Spencer. You're live tonight on Joy 99.7 FM. You're live on the Joy News channel on Multi TV. And of course, we are also live on the internet on myjoyonline.com. We are also on Twitter, hashtag ElectionHQ or hashtag FightChildPoverty. And tonight, this again is an inclusive conversation, and that is why we have Love Emisa helping us with the sign language, because we have members of the physically challenged community with us, and she will help us with that. And so if you're watching on television, you will see Love Emisa helping us with the sign language. Now, I want to start by attempting to touch on some of the key issues as far as poverty and inequality, inclusive growth are concerned when it comes to the political parties and what they said they will do in their policy proposals, in their manifestos going into 2017 to 2020. And all the parties, I must say, address this in pretty glowing terms. And if you look at the language they use, it gives a sense that they know what they're talking about. But we'll rather look at whether these key proposals they put forward really address the root causes of the problem or simply are window dressing. So let's look at the NDC. The NDC says, and the NDC's whole manifesto is on putting people first, which is essentially the conversation we're going to have. And it says, and I'm quoting here, in a new social compact that emphasizes our commitment to changing lives and transforming Ghana, putting people first means ensuring equitable access to quality education, one of the key issues we'll talk about, quality healthcare, another key issue. Also goes on to talk about preventive healthcare, harmonized social protection initiatives, and empowering the poorest and most vulnerable in our society. Now, they're going to say that we'll also direct our energies to improving and diversifying sports. That's how broad they were. Now, if you go to the specifics, and they break this down, they start from children, what they said they will do about children, childcare, childhood care and development. They talk about strengthening regulation on the establishment of preschools to meet required standards. And this is in the area of education, emphasizing that strengthening collaboration between the Ministry of Education and the Department of Social Welfare. Now, they're going to talk about primary and junior high school. And education is absolutely important when you have a conversation about poverty and inequality and inclusive growth, because that's where it starts. If you empower the child, the possibility is he or she might grow up to break that poverty chain. So the NDC says, of course, we've all had this, they will complete the processes of eliminating the remaining public schools under trees and abolish the shift system countrywide. They will continue the provision of free school uniforms. And these are the pro-poor initiatives that were agreed on early this year when, of course, a host of civil society group stakeholders, ministries, government agencies met at the conference center to deliberate on inclusive development. One of the key things they talked about is enhancing the social protection mechanisms and policies available. NDC says continue to provision of free school uniforms, free exercise books, free footwear for needy pupils, expand the school feeding program to all public basic schools in rural and peri-urban communities, review the capitation grant, continue to ensure improvement in special needs education. And I'm happy that in this auditorium we have many individuals with special needs who've been through education to help us enlighten us a bit more whether these proposals address your needs. Now, if we go to senior high school, in last elections, that's where the controversy was. We intend to complete the construction of the 200 community-day senior high schools and expand the progressively free SHS program to cover boarding students with emphasis on needy students, etc. Now come to agric, and agric is so important because, and that's where Sada will come in, and they'll talk a bit more about that, but we know the majority of us Ghanaians find themselves in this particular bracket, and yet that's where we find the most poor as far as agric is concerned. If we talk about employment, the conversation has gone, and researchers agree that the best way to lift people out of poverty in a country like ours is to channel more resources to improve in agriculture, because that's where the bulk of us find themselves as far as work is concerned. And if you read what the NDC says it will do, just one line out of that, I'll move on to the MPP so we can have our conversation. They say they will ensure that food crops and fishery sector do not impact negatively on inflation. A better congenial framework will be provided for the public and private sector to provide a modernization of agriculture sector. Ghana's status as an all-exporting country requires that we improve agriculture in order to avoid that disease. And they go on to talk about how they will invest a bit more of the oil revenues in this particular aspect. And this is an important part also. They want to introduce the Economic Transformation and Livelihood Empowerment Program, LEAP. And in that conversation earlier on this year, there was a consensus that the number of people benefiting from LEAP should be increased. NDC says they will establish that and they will expand the program. Now, I'll quickly move to the NPP. And they also have a broad theme as far as the area of dealing with key questions surrounding education and inequality, poverty is concerned. And they also want to do a number of issues. They tackle gender. They want to ensure 30% of all appointments are women, which is good. We've heard that before. The quota system, whether it worked or not, were established and discussed today. They also made commitment to ensure equitable distribution of the nation's wealth. But they also emphasize that they also look at LEAP and restructure it and also expand it. They also talk about agriculture modernization. Almost same, very fantastic ideas that both parties have put in the manifestos. If you read the CPP and the PNC, all of them express commitments to narrowing the gap between the rich and the poor, which we now know has been expanding, although Ghana, we are made to believe, has halved poverty. So I will not bore you with many of the facts, but I'll come to the experts to discuss. I'll come to the audience very shortly. And I want to start with Dr. Graham. Doug, we're having a conversation about poverty and inequality, the way forward. If you assess the policy proposals that have been put forward that is going to guide us, whoever wins in the next 15 days going to 2020, what's your general view on how the policies put forward go to address the key issues of poverty and inequality?
Thanks very much. First of all, to say that for me, the key issue about how to generate inclusive development really starts with how you develop the economy, create jobs, sustainable jobs, and also how public revenue is utilized. I mean, I make these points because when you look at the manifestos, they're all quite in agreement about the range of problems that need to be addressed. But some of them really offer a shopping list of projects to deal with the problems they identify, rather than policies and strategies out of which these projects would come. So you can have a list of things and say that to do with, say, improving manufacturing, we set up companies A, B, C, D. But that really is not a policy. What is the policy framework which is animating the choice of particular responses? And how do those choices link up with some of the other problems that you identify? Take agriculture, where everybody talks about it being very important as an area of employment. That is true. But many of the manifestos focus very heavily on how they will deepen the production of, say, the existing main cash crops. But the bulk of the poor food crop, the numbers in agriculture, and therefore paying attention to agriculture, seems to me misses an important point. In that, in fact, given the low productivity in agriculture, if we increase agricultural productivity, people would have to leave agriculture to find jobs outside the agricultural sector. So whilst agriculture needs to improve, one of the side effects of that improvement actually will be the need to create jobs outside agriculture. This is the historical pattern, which is where a clear understanding of the relationship between increasing agricultural productivity, raising agricultural incomes, improving livelihoods in the countryside has to be critically tied with a vision which says, what do we do with the people who be leaving the farm? Now, it is possible to create off-farm employment in the rural areas, whether it's in agro-processing or input and so on, or even expanding housing and so on. But for me, the manifestos are very lacking in the ways in which they don't seem to have a coherent engagement with this challenge of structural transition. Because they all talk about industrialization, agro-processing, and so on. But when it comes to both the policies and also the challenge of that transition, how to manage it, it seems to me that there's something missing there.
Okay, so that's his general assessment. I want to come to you, Charles. What's your own general assessment of the manifestos as you've seen it, especially when it comes to your particular area that you're interested in bridging the gap, but also generally poverty and inequality? Do they address the issues adequately?
Secondly, I hope I'm here not only as a SADA CEO, but as a professional in my own right, with, as a Ghanaian with some views about Ghana generally. In that second context, I think there's something really helpful about all of the manifestos. What is helpful is a recognition that it is not possible to win political power anymore without demonstrating how the state can be useful to different parts of society. I think it's a useful starting point to build upon. But none of the manifestos, as far as I know, actually articulate what an equitable society looks like. It's a distinction between equitable access to services, the creation of jobs, and creating the conditions in which the deep fissures and fractures in society are narrowed. So the society is relatively harmonious and equitable. The reason why this is important is that only when you have a vision of how you bring about an overall relatively egalitarian and equitable society will you identify the different sources of inequities to address cohesively. So, for example, we can say we want to access to education, or even we want to increase jobs. But it does not necessarily lead to the share of overall incomes going to wage labor. Now, if you increase jobs and even the products of education and the economy expanded and the share of the economy, less and less of it go to those who are in paid employment, then you would probably have increased inequalities in the functional sense, in the sense that you are concentrating wealth, say, in owners of capital or even in rent, and less in those who work. Therefore, if the purpose of growing an economy is to create work, and the purpose of work is to create a better society, then you have to articulate your vision of the relationship between the share of income between wages, profits, and rent, for example. This is important because we have a country in which the average wage rate is declining, the wealth is concentrating in the services sector. The services sector are not necessarily value-added services sector, largely banking and insurance and some real estate, high-end real estate, but wealth is made in the banking and insurance sector, not necessarily related to the real sector, which is the productive sector. So it is clear that you are creating a certain spiral of entrenched inequality in the society in the manner in That's one element. Unless you articulate that fuller vision of an equitable society, you'll be taking it bits and pieces. The second is this. And articulation, none of them actually articulate a full employment society. So if you look at virtually all of the countries we seek to mimic, you have a picture of full employment. You are striving towards full employment, which is close to zero involuntary unemployment. Only in that context will you be looking at the structure of the economy and the places for which you are stimulating growth in that part of the economy. And there's a third factor. We are a rapidly urbanizing society. It is not sufficient to concentrate, as Yao said, purely on agriculture. When you do that, two things happen. One is that productivity releases labor. They have to go somewhere. The second thing is that they end up in the urban area. So even off-farm employment that Yao talks about is likely first and foremost to be urbanized. But none of us really seems to have a plan for planned urbanization and how the urban center itself can be so organized and replanned that it becomes a positive feedback and relationship to the rural economy. So you have not just the rural-urban dynamics, you also have the primary sector, secondary sector dynamics that also link up to the tertiary sector. So in a sense, we have manifestos all saying good things, but they don't seem very connected into a whole.
That is an interesting assessment there. Raised, because we're going to pick up from there and break it down into the key areas that we all acknowledge the areas that we need to be addressing if we have to narrow the gap and do poverty to equality, job creation, agriculture, credit, education, etc. We'll be breaking it down very shortly. What's your own take on the manifestos based on what you've read and how they address the issues?
Thank you very much. I wouldn't even attempt to match up with the two of them because I'm speaking from an entirely different perspective.
Yes.
As a young person,
of course,
as a person from civil society, representing children and youth, and also representing women. I think that, first of all, I have, I think, three main points on how I think the manifestos have addressed inequalities. I think, first of all, they have all tried to deal with what they define as the vulnerable in the society within the different segments. So you had mentioned women, we had mentioned children, and in some cases, young people. What I personally have as an issue is that I feel that in addressing inequalities, what many political parties seem to have forgotten is that you do not address inequality, the people you see as vulnerable as just a target group, but as a partner. So for instance, throughout the different manifestos, all I see, we are going to educate the youth. We are going to do this for the youth. We are going to do this for the young people. We are going to do this for the women. And I do not see the parts where it looks at, young people are more than 50% of the population. So we are going to work with young people to achieve this for young people. I think that usually we forget that the age range of young people is between 15 to 35. And within this age range, there are actually experts within this, group that are not just future leaders, which all the manifestos seem to tag young people as future leaders. People who are going to be leading us in the next 15 years.
No, they are 50-something-year-olds.
No, but according to our national youth policy and the African Youth Charter, we are looking at a 15 to 35-year, age group. So I think that that's the first, I do not want to call it a mistake, but an oversight that the different political parties seem to have, that, we are not just the target audience, but a partner to ensure that all the things within your manifestos come to a reality. The second thing that I see is that I personally feel that no matter how many, like Doug said, the shopping list that you put together, no matter how many things are on your list, you need to have your own internal accountability systems. Yeah. I believe in accountability because I believe that for every single institution to work, you do not just put things on a plan and say, oh, we hope we all achieve this. You first of all put deadlines in, and then you put in systems to ensure that every single person does what they are supposed to do. But I do not see these accountability structures defined in any of the manifestos. And this is my personal, my perspective. Third thing, final, and I wish to go straight to the point on my issues because I'm not an academician. The third thing is that I feel that it is wrong for people who feel, for instance, that they are the opposition to always want to bring in new programs instead of working on strengthening existing ones. And that was one of the challenges I saw in a lot of the manifestos, that everybody seems to want to start a new program. So it is my government program. It is a new emergency employment program. Instead of saying that there's, for instance, already a LEAP system. So I would want to strengthen the LEAP program so that it has already covered 15% of the population. So I would want it to now cover 50% of the population.
To be fair, though, if you read the manifestos, a lot of them mention the existing policies. So there's MASLOC there that they want to improve, but then they all want to now show a certain sense of innovation. Okay. And to bring something new. Then they will introduce some new thing there that they want to do.
So my example was based on, not to cut you though, my example was based on, for instance, one political party was talking about working in the development of youth. The party never mentioned the National Youth Authority. I believe that the National Youth Authority has already been set up to deal with youth issues. So what I am expecting a political party to do, or in their manifesto, is to say that we acknowledge the existence of a National Youth Authority, but we also acknowledge the fact that there are challenges in making this authority work. So when we come to government, we are going to put this and this and this and this in place to ensure that the authority works, to benefit the young people. And these are the examples that I think that we should look at, and these are the little loopholes that I see. But overall, I feel that they are if all of the policies were put before me, I'd like us to put them all together, hand them over to the National Development Planning Commission to include in the 40-year development plan.
Yeah. That's a conversation that I wanted to have now. And I want to start focusing. And I see a lot of young men and women here. So let's go to the biggest issue as far as poverty and inequality is concerned today. And I can say this on authority because myself, I've been to, 8 regions already with one of the programs that we have called the Ballot Box, talking to real people in villages, some of them very remote villages, about what are the key issues of concern to them. The number one issue when it comes to this, poverty and inequality, inclusive development, is jobs, unemployment. And I'm pretty sure all of you will agree. That is the number one topmost issue. And if you read the manifestos and all the policy proposals, all the parties make that the primary objective of the document. To the extent that, in fact, the MP manifesto is framed within that context. If you read the NDC, same. They all acknowledge it's a problem. But, Doc, first of all, you accept, let's start with it from the basics. This concept of unemployment. It seems to be, we've talked about it this whole year, and many people say is what is going to influence. We've spoken to what, 3,000, almost 4,000 people. Half of that number say unemployment is a key thing they're going to consider. They're going to consider whether they are unemployed or not, or whether they are going to get jobs. We were in this same school last week, Wednesday. Some of you were in that program. And I asked the question of the young students in the political science department, how confident are they about their future once they graduate of the school? And the room exploded into, no, we are not. And that seemed to perpetuate the poverty and inequality, because the guy is out of school. And the thing I had last week that shocked me, there are people with professorial degrees, PhDs, who are sitting at home without jobs. And I was questioning the professors in the hall, and I'm saying, you can't be telling me the truth. He said, yes, I can give you an example. One of the gentlemen got up and said, I'm just out of my bachelor's. I'm going to go do my master's and do my PhD and even do a second PhD until I get a job. In other words, she's simply going to school because there's no job. And so school has become an avenue to occupy himself and escape the unemployment scenario. Doug, how big a part of this poverty and inequality conversation, when you consider unemployment, how big a part is that in this whole poverty and inequality? And are the parties addressing it in a way that is holistic, that actually deals with the root causes, or possibly just a simple case of lip service?
I mean, I think you're absolutely right, because the unemployment issue is the biggest issue. And it's not only the overtly unemployed people. I mean, the rural situation that has been described, that most people are in agriculture. We're really talking about people who are engaged in activities which bring very little return. So livelihood levels, as we know, are very poor in the countryside. And Charles also mentioned the growing urbanization and the huge gulf that you find, in the urban areas. A lot of people really scratching for a living. A few days ago, I was being interviewed about this Galamsey problem, and I made the point I've made several times, that really the young people who are engaged in Galamsey, the young people who are selling in the streets, in the urban areas, the women who are being whipped on the pavement, the people who suddenly want to enjoy the beauty of the new Kwame Nkrumah, interchange,
the Dubai,
for whom a special task force has been created to prevent them from gathering. They are all part of the same problem of people trying to earn a living. And in fact, the Kwame Nkrumah interchange story is very interesting, because there's this new glitzy statement of modernism. And suddenly the AMA has to create a task force to control the reality. The kind of, as the reality of people who just want somewhere to lay their heads. Okay? So, and that's the dichotomy. And you find many other indications of this. A few days ago, the Financial and Business and Financial Times had a story that Stanbic Bank is going to create a new investment window here, because Ghana has the fastest growing number of high net worth individuals in Africa.
Really?
Yeah. So on one end, we have the fastest growing, numbers of high net worth people in Africa, and the biggest discussion topic in the country is unemployment. I mean, that is a stark statement about the inequality.
But the research backs you there. It shows that although we have halved poverty, so they tell us, the gap between the rich and the poor is widening.
So
I guess that's a classic example of that.
Yeah, it's important to keep, because you see, when you hear the narrative about percentage GDP growth, lower middle income country, it doesn't really tell us anything about distribution. It doesn't tell us anything about how people are getting by. These are aggregates, okay? And I think the unemployment thing is directly connected really also to the economic model. An economic model which has been increasingly liberalized. An economic model where, despite what Charles said about a recognition of the role of the state, actually, the state has seen this role primarily as facilitating private wealth accumulation. Yeah. And then the incidental outcome being job creation and incomes. Okay? And when you read the manifestos, you see on one hand this recognition of of unemployment as a major issue, but certainly for the two main parties, a commitment to the same economic model. Now, the thing about people bringing their own projects, we should not be confused with bringing different policies. The policies remain the same, but people may have new projects which allows a new set of cronies to control public resources, a new set of cronies to have access to quick returns and so on. And I think if we look, in my view, about even some of the public investments which are supposed to be dealing with the unemployment problem, it is clear that really money is being wasted, because every economy where jobs have been created on a sustainable basis towards the kind of full employment Charles is talking about, jobs are not created through targeted projects that will create 20,000 jobs by giving money to X. Economy-wide policies which dynamize the emergence of enterprises, dynamize investments, dynamize the creation of jobs, so that there you are using your tax policy as an incentive mechanism. You are targeting your public investment, so that even where you're talking about, say, infrastructural investment, I mean, infrastructure is not a neutral category. We cannot celebrate infrastructure because we have a new interchange at, say, Nkrumah Circle. That's good. We move around. But it's arguable that the newly asphalted road in East Legon, if that money was spent repairing a bridge in some remote corner of the country, a few more farmers might be able to get their goods to market and therefore expand their production. Okay, those are the ways in which the discussion about public expenditure interfaces with job creation. So if you create, say free zones, for example, but you have policies for free zones, which basically it's interested in fairly minimal standards. You're interested in totting up your investment attraction, but your key externalities are not the social returns and sustainable, employment. A lot of things are missing. So there are many dots which are unconnected. And there are also many dots in policy which are in the wrong place. And there are also many policy interventions which are not being made at all. And I think the thing about the agrarian transition, which people talk about, is not in terms of how, which I think is very critical. First of all, if you look at what can be done to increase this country's capacity to feed itself, this country's capacity to be part of regional value chains. There's an interesting thing in the MPP manifesto. We talked about creating industrial zones in border areas where regional aggregation can take place. We are very focused on being part of global value chains, which primarily really is about the old-style cash crop production. If we began to think in terms of regional value chains, think about millet. You can create a strong millet value chain in West Africa. You can create maize value chains in West Africa. I saw crops listed in the manifestos of some of the parties. I didn't see cassava mentioned. I didn't see maize mentioned. Cocoa is there, coffee is there, but the things we eat, which can be the basis of agro-industrial processing. We have several wheat processing factories in this country. But in Ghana, where everybody eats maize or millet, people still carry pan loads of grain on their head to small mills, when really industrial milling of maize will create jobs, reduce post-harvest losses, and so on. Little things which are in our face. But because people are so wedded to the existing logic of being efficient in traditional export crops and so-called non-traditional export crops. The value chains, national and regional, which would dynamize and expand, employment, are really missing out in the conversation.
Just agree. There's something you raised that I want to. It's tails off from here. If you read the manifestos, there's a heavy focus on the same agricultural mechanization and focusing on agric and using agric. And if you read the agreement that was reached at this forum that everybody came together early in the year to put together, that again has that same focus, that if you deal with agric, you solve the problem. And I want to read it. So Ghana is overly reliant on producing raw materials, particularly gold, etc. They make up 80% of exports, which the problem. Natural resources also do not create. Now, in contrast, most poor people are found in the agric sector. And the forum agreed that more should be done to invest in food crops in Ghana. And that irrigation is a major issue, as if we invest in it, it can transform farmers from producing 1 crop per year to producing 2 per year. You read the manifestos, they buy into this. All of them want to mechanize agriculture. Of course, we've heard that MPP say they're going to build 1 factory in each region. And mostly when they say that, they're talking about agro-based factories. NDC has something similar. They're talking about the development authorities. SADA is one of them, obviously, and agriculture is a huge part. I'm curious, though, to ask whether focusing on the agric is still the way to go in reducing poverty and inequality today, or maybe we should be looking elsewhere, as the parties have said they will do.
Okay, first, the little joke. The great thing about not being a doctor is that you don't get called a dog. We are a primary economy. Our largest assets, productive assets, lie in the land. And we are very fortunate as a country. We actually have large quantities of water. We hold the majority of the Volta River basins. In the northern part of the country alone, well over 40 million cubic meters of runoff water happens every year. Most of it dashes through the Volta River straight into the sea. So we have land, we have water, we have a long history of farming. Our primary assets, productive assets, rather than rental assets, are in agriculture.
But isn't that a problem?
Now,
because if you listen to Doc,
let me come to you.
We need to change the structure of the economy.
But the structure of the economy are not separate things. The structure of the economy starts with when you are dynamizing your most abundant asset. So you are increasing productivity in your most abundant asset. Remember, you have to simultaneously catalyze your secondary sector. That is your manufacturing. And find the appropriate policies to catalyze value-added services, innovation, technology, services that serve the productive sector. So you have, when the agricultural sector is increasing, but the industrial sector is increasing even faster, and the services sector is increasing faster than agriculture. They are all based on your primary, essentially. But the structure changes because the share of agriculture reduces as a percentage of the total economy. That's your structural transformation. But remember, it has an impact, the movement of labor and people. It has a natural urbanizing impact. That's why you have to plan your urban economies. And your urban economies need not be simply places people struggle to sell on the streets. You have to have a right to housing policy. So in places where housing has been turned as a dynamism for the economy widely, it absorbs a lot of labor if you are providing housing for everybody, not the super, upper, middle, rich, the big estates, but a housing policy for everybody. Inside housing are products that are produced in this country. Your cement, your sand, your stone, even dimension stones for tiling, and the electrical wires that wire the house, and the electrical sockets, plus the other cables that power your television. If you take a house points you to a complex process of manufacturing possibilities. You have to dynamize that. So when Dr. Graham talks about it's not just agriculture, he actually means it's not just about agriculture. It has to be a set of connected policies. But you have to pay attention to urban planning, urban housing. And inside the housing process, pay attention to maximizing local content in housing. And then that becomes the incentives for the rest of manufacturing. And it is right that we start to think about, zones, free trade or industrial zones around our borders. Because after all, it is not possible really to conceive as a productive, dynamic, sustainable economy Ghana stuck in the middle of a broader West Africa, unconnected to West Africa. We have to. That's our first primary market. If we did so, then even the demand source for all of these things come along. But agriculture is the starting point. You have to feed a growing urbanized society. You have to set off the labor surpluses that you release, which you catalyze, when you catalyze the secondary and tertiary sector.
Question, have you seen enough in the proposals going for 2017-2020 to make agriculture mechanized in a way that lifts people out of poverty?
Well, I was happy to see that all the parties picked some work that SADA had been doing for the past 2 years. An intensive study of the irrigation capabilities of the country, at least the 54% of the country that is the SADA zone, and the potential value chains that can be stimulated, connected to the rest of West Africa. Without irrigation, in your most dynamic agricultural zone, you can't do it. So it is good to take that up. But the thing is that the manifestos don't quite tell you, because it's a checklist of many things to appeal to several constituencies. You can't read a priority in it. You can't see how one sector connects to the others, and they don't tell you how they pay for it. Therefore, you really can't tell whether these things really mean what they say.
I see. So that is an interesting point. I wish you could expand a bit on that point, because if agriculture is, most people agree, is a way to lift people out of poverty because everybody's there, and yet the proposals going forward, do you agree with that though? Because a lot of the young people, we've been trying to get them, everybody has been saying go into agric, etc., but they don't want to go into agric. I don't want to go into agric.
I think you are missing a point.
Yeah.
I think you are missing a point
Sure.
from where when we talk about agriculture and its possibilities, we're also making the point that from there you have outputs which can become inputs in other sectors of the economy.
Specifically, such as?
Oh, I mean, say if you take processing, if you take the maize that I use, take maize for your mechanization, for your irrigation, you need inputs into agriculture. If you are developing the technologies, okay, you produce, say, machine tools, simple things people will use, you are producing inputs that go into agriculture. That's manufacturing of a certain type, technical goods going into agriculture. The outputs go into both food production and other industrial products. So they produce inputs. To be able to utilize those inputs, you also need to create other productive enterprises. Now, it doesn't mean, we're not talking about an economy which is closed, because you continue to export things, you continue to import things. The point we are making is that the possibilities of our agriculture are, in terms of its dynamizing possibilities for industrialization, not simply in terms of processing, but also as a target for inputs, is not being exploited. When policymakers talk about people going to agriculture, it is this idea that everybody should take 2 acres, okay, and produce some maize, a kind of Operation Feed Yourself type of thing. No. That's not what we are talking about. We are talking about, because agriculture, as is being talked about in that way, is very low productivity agriculture. For us to be competitive, we need to raise productivity in agriculture. It requires technological transformation. Now, when people talk about mechanization, I don't know if it simply means putting tractors everywhere, because soil type also determines the kind of equipment you use in a place. So technology is not neutral. Years ago, I remember during the Third Republic, the government imported some tractors, okay, with plows. But the plows were so deep that they were turning the bottom soil onto the top of the fertile soil. So these are all questions. So it's not simply mechanization, but you also need to understand the context within which you are working and the kinds of technologies which are appropriate. So the thing about agriculture and employment is not simply about expanding food production, but the linkages that can be generated. And I think there's a wider point in that way that we should expand when we talk about that. We need to build more and more linkages among the sectors of our economy, of the type that are mutually reinforcing.
And I guess the question then becomes whether you've seen enough in the proposals to achieve those linkages. The microphone, please.
Everybody recognizes the need to do those things, but you don't get enough indication of how they are planning to do it. Okay, because you have a shopping list, which shopping list really, in a way, you can describe as outcomes of unarticulated strategies.
Yeah, it is, yes. Job creation, I mean, from a youth activist point of view, have you seen enough to give you hope?
If it's about seeing enough to give me hope, theoretically, I would say yes. I'm not sure about practically.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to agree with a number of things that both speakers had said, especially with interlinking policies. And I strongly agree with that. Because, for instance, if I look at the bit about young women in agriculture, for instance, I think that within the CPP manifesto, if I'm not wrong, there was one statement about wanting to introduce a culture policy of some sort. Now, we all know that in this 21st century, in certain parts of Ghana, there are still places where young women, and if you're a woman, it's also, gender can become some form of, basis for inequalities sometimes. Now, if you're a woman, you are unable to have land as an asset in some places. And I based on that, I feel like that this, interlinking policies is truly something that we should look at. Another example, an educational policy that tends to churn out young people who are interested in doing things for themselves, so much so that they start to think about how can we make agriculture easy in a much more technological, way. It is one of the ways that I see these interlinkages. So I think that we need to look at a way of putting all of the various problems or challenges or even difficulties that we have as a country on one plate and see how we can look at the different ministries, the roles they will play, the MMDAs, the DCEs, and the different policies that they have. I think I chanced upon the national migration policy, and I loved the last bit of the national migration policy, which actually mentions ministries, different ministries, and what roles they can play. It mentioned the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Employment, mentioned even mention the media, mention civil society. And I think we should start looking at things like that from, from a manifesto point of view, because it's from these manifestos that people would start to govern us.
Okay, I want to give the audience opportunity to contribute to the conversation. But remember that if you have a question, you can raise your hands and I'll give you an opportunity to ask. But yeah, more complex aspects of this. For example, social protection is a key thing when it comes to reducing poverty and reducing the gap between the rich and the poor, but also inclusive growth. One of the key vehicles that all the parties talk about is a LEAP program, and there's an agreement that. The forum that was held earlier this year agreed that they should increase the current program of beneficiaries should increase from 1,470 to 550,000 because to help a lot of more people out of poverty. But if you look at the approach that have been adopted by the both parties, they all want to improve the program. But should LEAP be maintained in its current form? In its current form, essentially, handouts are given. There are people who are ideologically opposed to that. Rather, equip them with skills, and that comes back to education. And I want us to box the two together and see how we could have a conversation around giving people skills so that they can raise themselves out of poverty. In other words, give livelihood to themselves, or still pursuing a LEAP program where we're giving them handouts, which are not enough anyway. Mr. Bugri, you want to hazard a comment on this?
This thing doesn't like me at all. I mean, there are different things. There are people unable to work, either because they are too poor, they are too old, their levels of disability is too harsh, or they are too young with grandparents to take care of them, that the state has to take care of them. So a universal social protection for those who can't work is part of being a humane society. And we need to extend that at universally, in a way that South Africa and others have tried to do. In fact, they expanded it to young people up to a certain point. But there are also those who can work, but their levels of income poverty is such that they can be given a helping hand to take it one step forward to be able to make a job. That type of social protection, social support, needs to be connected to a broader work agenda. So elsewhere, you will have a social protection approach which also seeks to strengthen work, strengthen the ability to earn an income. I think the popular one is always the Brazilians. And how do they do it? They provide support to an income poor family or community. But they also provide support in the form of mopping up the produce from the area. So you create a marketing incentive, so that when their support is to enable them produce as small farmers, and you have a market and intervention to reduce the fragility associated with price instabilities for a poor person. And then they rope in the public works programs. So public works programs that encourage people in very harsh environment to earn a living. That's been used in India quite a lot. For example, you can improve your farm by planting trees, by creating contour bands, by mopping up the stones in order to reduce flooding and improve the productivity of your low productive land. In doing so, when you have a social protection handout, it becomes a hands out, because with time, your productive asset improves. So it is not simply expanding the number of people in LEAP. It is also thinking creatively about connecting the dots, about bringing the microfinance sector into that whole pot, because after all, they are meant to be serving the people at the lower bottom end of the financial services scale. So let's just don't talk numbers. Let's talk about connections, connectivity. And they are a bit separate from education. You can educate people, as you said, this professor doesn't have a job. He should, if he's not very ill, he should actually be able to do something, whether he's appropriately paid or not. But it is, education itself is just a right. It's something that helps society overall. We must do it anyway. But if we are thinking jobs-related education, then we are thinking skills. We are thinking science. We are thinking of education which is not just book, which is the attitude, the thing that encourages self-innovation, creativity, taking risks, and those kinds of things for oneself. Those we need to look at in our education system, but they don't replace having to support and protect the people living in
So we need to do both together.
Of course.
Okay.
I just wanted to add one more point. Linked, I think he spoke my mind exactly. Maybe I didn't say it exactly that way, but he spoke exactly my mind. And just linking it to the bit about microfinance institutions, and even looking generally at a policy, a financial policy. I don't know how that works out, but a financial policy that gives young people who are within this, who are taken care of within the LEAP's confines, to be able to take risk. So that if, for instance, we have an educational policy that is skills-based, that's able to churn out young people who are able to do something for themselves. Now, I want to do something for myself. Are there banking and financial institutions that are willing to risk investing in me so that I make some, make something and then make some produce out of it, make some income and profits out of it, and also they also benefit. And I think it's all about linkages and all about ensuring that the educational policies, the financial policies, even private-public partnerships work strongly within the systems that we are talking about.
Look, it's like a difficult one in terms of comparing the two parties. There's a quote here. Tell me what you think about it. The MPP says, refocus LEAP program, which has become a blatant source of political patronage by, among other things, adopting effective, accurate means, testing to target, identify, enroll, and properly identify beneficiaries. That's what they say about LEAP. But they also link to that and say they will also refocus and give people skills, allowing them to create their own wealth in their own right. The NDC says the Economic Transformation and Livelihood Empowerment Program. And they go on to say that having stabilized the economy by reducing budget deficit to single digit, they mentioned that the digit is not really important for our conversation right now, the next NDC government will implement the Economic Transformation and Livelihood Empowerment Program with the view to creating more employment. So their focus there, they've added something to it. It just used to be LEAP, but they've added economic transformation to the existing LEAP, and they want to focus it on creating more employment. I mean, what's your reading of both, and which maybe addresses the problem as you know it?
I mean, I think Charles's point about the universal protection is quite important, because you see, you can have an approach to social protection which is basically dealing with areas which could be politically or socially problematic. So really a minimalist approach, a kind of very minimal safety net thing. Because if you, for example, say, if you look at the social protection, social support, you can even include the fact that, say, pregnant women get certain types of free health care. So it's a whole spread of different kind of intervention. I think LEAP targets the very poorest. But I think if we look at it in terms of the fact that really you are looking on one hand to expand social protection in a number of ways, whether it's free uniforms, school feeding, there are all kinds of different elements of that. But you also want to increase the possibilities for people to have the dignity of earning their own income. Because many people would rather work than depend on handouts.
True.
This is easily forgotten. Many people would rather do things for themselves than, and you can never support people completely, particularly given the economics of it in our situation. So, I mean, I share Charles's point completely on that, and also the need to separate that discussion from the business about, say, the social sectors. Social development, health, and education have their own importance independent of the needs of the poorest or the most marginalized. They partake of those kinds of policies, but we should not conflate the two. And I don't know much about the business of political, patronage in relation to that.
Which is always an issue when it comes to the social protection policies that have been introduced in the past. Maslow was heavily criticized because allegedly monies were being given to a particular political party. So it's always become a conversation anytime we introduce any social policy. And I guess it's something that we need to discuss. It's time to engage my audience. If you have a question, please raise your hands. The microphone will come to you. And you could contribute. You can ask a question or simply make a contribution. Do you have a question in the audience? And I would love to hear from ladies, because that will really, yes, there's a question there. Can we get a microphone? Let's get a microphone. Let's get the questions coming in. Any more hands? I see hands all over the place. Let's get the microphones going around. You can ask questions or engage our audience. Yes, there's a hand there. Yes. Okay. Stand up for us, sir. You mention your name. Oh, you want to sit? You want to sit? Okay. Oh, no, that. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. I am Owusu Debra. Mine is a contribution. When we talk about poverty, there is a particular bracket that is most affected, and that is the person with disability. So that my contribution will be that there will have to be deliberate government efforts to raise these people in that bracket, that fraternity, out of the poverty. Because the issue is we face challenges when it comes to education, when it comes to health, and when it comes to a lot of things, including jobs. Okay, so the issue is because of these challenges, especially education, skills. I mean, if a person with disability is unable to access education and skills, it will then mean that that person might find it difficult, getting a job. You see, and that will, contribute to making the person poor, because certain, menial jobs that maybe an individual who is not disabled can engage in, that person with disability cannot. Okay. Again, I think that the other aspect of deliberate government effort, conscious effort, will have to be making sure that I see that in the CPP manifesto, where they talk about making sure that they will reserve 5% of all government and private jobs to persons with disability, so that for those of us, or for those persons with disability who will be able, who are able to access education, when they come out, they will, be given some priority when it comes to employment. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you read the manifestos as far as that is concerned, the NDC says, for example, propose amendment to the Persons with Disability Act to make it consistent with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. And this is interesting because the MPP has a similar, almost word for word. It says, amend the Disability Act to bring it into line with the UN Convention on Disability and pass appropriate legislative instruments for the implementation of the Mental Health Act and the Disability Act. So all of them agree, but the question is whether the mere passage or amendment of a law achieves that point. We've seen the Disability Act pass that says that you should make buildings accessible. 10-year moratorium was given. We've passed the 10-year mark, have we not? We have we not? And the buildings are still not accessible. I work in an environment where you can't come there if you are a disabled person. I'm saying that because I'm not proud of it, and I want us to do something about it. I don't know if you were coming here, how difficult was it for you to access the University of Ghana campuses? I want to have a conversation with a disability, just a minute before I move on this. It's a very important part of dealing with poverty and inequality. So I don't know, maybe the microphone can remain, because I see the disability association members around. So let's have a conversation a bit more about it, because there's a huge plank of this that hasn't been dealt with. Yes, can we get a microphone? I need somebody to be controlling the microphones for me. Where's Justice and Maxwell? Microphones around. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I agree with you with all that you've said. When it comes to inequality, we face a huge challenge in dealing with livelihood in this country. For persons with disabilities living and be able to move, be able even to look for job, it becomes a big challenge. Most of the companies are not accessible. They are building. You can't even go there looking for job, let alone presenting your applications and all that. Sometimes even you are not employed because the mere sight of you tells them that they might disturb you if you are employed.
And the thing that shocks me, they're building high-rise buildings with no lifts. So if you're disabled, the floor is like 10 floors. How do you get there?
Exactly.
How do you climb to the 10th floor if that's where the boss is? Most often the HRs are in the 10th floor. That's the last floor.
Yeah.
I mean, and they will never come down to come and meet you down there.
And we are not enforcing the laws. You know, I mean, we have 10-year moratorium that all buildings should be made accessible.
It's expired, hasn't it?
It's expired this year, August. Yeah. It's expired. And even the law says that all new buildings must have accessibility features. Yeah. Look at all the new buildings. I mean, they don't care about us. So if we talk about poverty and inequality, I don't know whether we are serious or whether we meant what we're talking about. If a disabled person wants to board transport from one point to another, he spends a lot of money than even the able person.
Forgive me, let me ask you a question then. So when you hear the party say the approach is to amend the law and make it in conformity with UN, does it sit with you as something that really will address your problem? Is that what you need?
No, it's a political statement. Because even the old one, what are they doing about it? They are doing nothing about it. Even the old one, they should be implementing the old one. I mean, we should be a step forward. Okay? There's nothing. The law says that education shall be free for persons with disability. I mean, where are we now? Disabled persons are not given any opportunity in education. Look at the E-blocks that are built. I mean, a person with disability cannot have access to it. You have a small ramp being built on the ground floor. So we say that a person with disability will only remain in the ground floor when they go to the next floor. If Form 1, SAS Form 1 is in the first floor or the ground floor, the second floor occupies the Form 2. So the person with disability, somebody who sits in the wheelchair, how does he go through that education? Yeah. It's a big challenge. Yeah. I mean, these things are simple things that we should be doing, but I mean, it's like we need some level of capacity, some brain capacity to be able to do that. But these are simple things that we should be able to do as a country.
Great. As I move the microphones along, Mr. Bugri, which part in the SADA program, what's the disability aspect in the SADA program? Do you have any at all? Very briefly, so that we can move on. Do you have any at all in the SADA program?
Yes, only in terms of planning the ways to support the people with disability in the SADA zone to organize and access jobs.
Okay.
But you see, it's a more complex issue.
It is.
You will find that the the poorest areas are also the areas that are the main drivers of disability. Why? It is healthcare, it is nutrition, it is overall access to services. And so a child very young, hasn't had access to polio vaccination, has had a little problem and doesn't have access to hospital treatment, and ends up losing their hearing, their eyesight, or their ability to walk. And so there is the first thing is to try and, as much as possible, reduce the conditions for the recreation of disabilities, unless except the ones that are genetic in nature. But it's really largely poverty and social, social factors driven for areas of disability.
Any mic? Where's the microphone? Yes, sir. Your name, sir?
I am Julian Kobna. I'm the president of the National Union of Ghana Students.
Okay, can you stand up for me, please? I'll be very grateful. So the microphones, the cameras can...
Okay, I think there's a big part of this conversation we have not introduced tonight. That is about education.
Yeah.
The biggest tool to use to close down the gap of inequality is the force of education.
True.
And you see, that's why in 1992 we agreed that you have some sense of a free, compulsory, universal basic education for every Ghanaian. If you look at the political parties in the manifesto, we have 2 weeks to elections. And we expect that probably in 2017, we'll have every Ghanaian child, whether you are able or disabled, to be able to have free education, at least to the senior high school level. And that's inclusive of cost of feeding at the senior high school level.
But they all say they'll do free education.
I'll tell you, see, there's that argument about rising cost of public debt that we hear the political parties talk about. And we have not seen the parties make us aware of some effective strategies, how to raise revenue to fund that. That is absent in the conversation. You're not having people ask them these questions. And so, as he mentioned also, if you want to build an economy at this level, you should be able to build a knowledge-driven economy. That means you're able to build innovations out of people's enterprises. That means there must be urgent reforms at the university level. That if you come to the university, we should be able to get people to do entrepreneurship, to be able to get out of school and start some jobs from the course. If you are going to create jobs, we should create more industries out of individual enterprises. We don't find out in our education reforms. And so you see, it's just like get to school, get a degree, go out of school. We don't have enough capacity to start your own job and stuff. And that's also it's also missing in the manifesto that you've seen the political parties turn out. I'm asking you, Doc, as a matter of urgency, don't you think that as a country, we should be able to utilize the legal infrastructure to pass a bill in Parliament that makes sure that probably by May 2017, every Ghanaian child must have access to university, to education at the senior high school level without any cost. And it should also be that if government defaults on that, somebody must be punished for that. And also, there's another question I want to put here. You see, if, for instance, in Fumbesi, in the northern region, government provides the schools, government provides the incentive, and I am a parent. Instead of taking my child to school, my child is in school, is at home, even at the peak hours of being in school. I'm 6 years now. At the age of, in 10 years now, I'll be 16 years without education. That means that I'm going to end up as part of the unproductive people. Don't you think that people should be punished by law for failing to take their children to school when the incentives are provided for them?
Thank you very much, Doc.
Let me start with your last point. You know, a friend told me about the area that he comes from, which is a cattle breeding area, where many young people, looking at their colleagues who have been to school, who are walking around unemployed, decide that they would rather rear cattle. Because if you keep cattle for other people under a kind of crop sharing arrangement, each other cow belongs to you. And by the time they are adults, they have their own kraal of cattle. So that in economic terms, they see themselves much better off than those who went to school. Now, it's not an irrational choice. I don't think it's the best choice, but it's not an irrational choice. I'm telling this story just to put in perspective the fact that the choices people make, the thing about sanctions, really doesn't quite address the complexity or why people make certain choices. Okay? So I would want all children to be in school on the basis of incentives. But there are many disincentives today. why some people don't send their children to school. Okay? I know people who are professors now who talk about how they were taken from one village to another to stay with relations, people who walk so many miles and so on. I mean, we've been talking about the school buildings which are coming up. If you are a disabled child and you cannot enter the classroom, should your parents be punished for not sending you to school? So I think it's complicated. And I think we should reflect on that. And I think when you have not created the optimum conditions as a state for giving incentives to people to go to school, you really doesn't lie in your mouth to use certain kind of instruments. Okay? To the second point about the educational system, I know it's a rage now to teach people entrepreneurship. Okay? But entrepreneurs have to employ people. They must set up businesses which are economically viable. The majority of people in every society are not going to set up businesses. They are going to be employees in some enterprise or the other. So it's a minority of people who become entrepreneurs. The vast majority apply their skills to earn a living. And I think in Ghana here, the discussion about teaching everybody entrepreneurship has become an escape from confronting the question that this economy is not creating jobs. And to put the onus on you that because you are not creative, that's why you are sitting at home. It's a diversion.
And the politicians have been using that language.
It's a diversion. Okay? I've got a PhD in law. Okay? I've dabbled in many things. I've set up a newspaper. I've done many things because I have skills. I can do many things. Okay? The one thing I haven't tried is to set up an enterprise to make profits. But I ran a not-for-profit organization. Okay? And I didn't train in entrepreneurship. But you have to learn management skills to run any institution. So let's focus on the primary issue. Is this economy even creating the conditions for those who want to be entrepreneurs?
What's your answer, though?
It is not.
Okay. Do you want to comment on that because you represent it? I'll come to the rest of it.
Hi.
Yeah.
I wanted to comment on it from a slightly different perspective, as usual, especially on the bit about providing sanctions. And I agree with Doc on that. You cannot provide sanctions to people for not taking their children to school when the systems are not set right. One clear example, which I'm sure would be, something I'm bringing your minds to, is, for instance, we are talking about, I remember recently the UN Population Fund launched a State of the World's Population Report, and it was looking at the world of a 10-year-old, an adolescent girl. And one of the things that they stated in it was comparing a 10-year-old in one part of the world to a 10-year-old in another part of the world, where a 10-year-old in one part of the world at that point starts to see new possibilities with education, starts to think about what she wants to do, has support, systems are in place. And then another 10-year-old who, because of something she can't control, because she has menstruated or she's in her period,
and hasn't got a pad,
has not got a pad, cannot go to school. And there are these very simple things that we need to start looking at. Certain systems must just be set in place and ensure that everybody has, almost the same opportunities. Because I think that it is also some sort of utopia to think that everybody would have the same opportunities. But at least the effort to ensure that a girl in some village somewhere can go to school, even when she's in a period. And those are the things that we need to start looking
Or a
at.
10-year-old in Ghana being told that he can use the head is used to carry load. And the 10-year-old in the UK being told that the head is used to think. Yes. Your name? Yes, speaking to it, let's see if it works. Speaking to it?
Hello.
Yes.
Thank you, Evans. My name is Solomon Anampansa.
Speak up, please, for me.
My name is Solomon Anampansa, 10th President for Legon. It's a very interesting conversation. And for me, when you talk about economy and job creation, I feel strongly that there are so many opportunities that exist for us. But the problem is our ability to identify those problems. And I would like to emphasize on the point that the NUC's president made. Education is a very important component. And when you look at the content of education that we have in Ghana and also in Africa, I feel that there is a mismatch between the kind of education and the system. Because when you look at the education that we get, it doesn't really train students to be able to tackle problems that exist and confront the society. For instance, I did a small research on poultry because I was interested in going into poultry. And you realize that that particular sector holds a lot of opportunities for so many young people. You look at the supply chain, those who can supply food, the feed to the poultry. You look at even those who can sell the eggs. You look at those who can even provide the chemicals and other things. It's a whole industry on its own. But how are we being trained to be able to identify these opportunities and to be able to create our own source of employment? For instance...
Let me answer a question then. Yes. As a young student leader yourself, do you think the education that you are currently getting is equipping you to do just that?
I don't think it is equipping me to do that. Okay. Because, for instance, we have a lot of students studying political science. We have so many students studying psychology and so on. And you look at the agricultural sector, how many people are given the opportunity to come and study agribusiness in University of Ghana here, for instance? There's a wide gap between the kind of education we are receiving and what we are supposed to do after that education we have received. So I think we need to look at the quality and the content of education. And I don't want to sound too platonic, but then the education should be able to train us as young people to be able to identify, even within our environment, problems. And in tackling the problems in the society, that is how we create employment for ourselves.
Okay. Doug, I see you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I agree with you up to a point, but I'm also disappointed in some of your things. Let me explain. I mean, I agree with you that our educational system at the university level could equip young people to better understand this economy and society and its problems. But what it should do for everybody is to give them critical, analytical capabilities, whatever area you are studying, okay? Whether it's in psychology, whether it's in history, so you understand your society and its challenges. So when you study geography, or in our time, you knew more about the wheat belt in the US than you did about, say, the geography of northern Ghana. Okay, that kind of thing definitely is incorrect. But I think you are conflating a number of things. You know, no educational system, general educational system, is going to give you skills to be a good poultry farmer. It will give you the analytical and critical skills to apply to any problem that you come across so that you can solve it. And I also think that it's a mistake to think so narrowly about the nature of society and these problems. Society needs people who write fiction. Society needs poets. Society needs historians who can record what is going on so that we learn from the past. Even you, if you became a multimillionaire, you need someone in your human resources department who has trained in psychology. Okay, so the needs of society are multifaceted, complex, and varied. And I think this is precisely, I think, what is happening with this narrowing to a certain crude economism
Doc, I have a question for you on that. Because if you read all the manifestos say, they want to align education with the job market. I'm sure you heard that.
Yeah, but what does the job market mean? Is the job market simply somebody who wants to set up a factory or sell imported, toilet bowls? Is that the job market? The job market, I'm saying, is very broad. Because Bob Dylan has just won the Nobel for his lyrics.
Yeah.
I mean, we should see society in its complex vibrancy, rather than this narrow thing that is only homo economicus, who makes up society. And homo as man, because in this dialogue, women tend to be absent. I think we really need, in this conversation, to see society in this complexity and variability.
Interesting point there.
No, it's just to follow down the same road, because...
So you agree with the sentiment?
Yes, and to say just a few more about this, because it's what is really pulling us back. In 2012, when after several years, I decided to just go and teach and to do this PhD that never finishes. So I went to teach development studies at Swansea University, and they put us for 3 months to teach us how to be teachers. The main message we got was that it's not, of course, you have that tiny specialism, but the student in the end isn't going to be carrying around equations as an economist. The value to the student is that you are helping them try and solve problems. Keep inquiring. Ask questions. Seek answers. First degree, second degree, you've read some things, but you will never know enough unless you have developed a culture of wanting to know. These days, when I go up to my village in Bolgatanga, somewhere further than that, near the Burkina Faso border, I wish I had the skill to organize the young people, the older people who are doing dancing and music. It's such authentic, non-commercialized. I could almost see the possibility of creating, a market, a business, a section, an area of the economy, totally untouched. If I were a good writer, I probably would write, my history in certain ways that I have an income. I wish I knew anything sufficiently about history, because in fact, I came to the conclusion that the most important study of economics is economic history. And so my shelf is no more about macroeconomics or even technology economics. It's history. Don't treat any subject as unimportant. Find out how, in that area, you can create. And I think this is very important. And the last thing I wanted to say is that the school cannot be disconnected from the society and the economy. So SADA has been trying to help think about the savannah. We traveled all over Brazil, ended up in Singapore. One of the things that struck me in a vocational school I was looking at is that teaching people how to run a hotel, the hospitality industry, is connected to the hospitality industry itself. Teaching people how to maintain an aircraft is, as TVET, is connected to the aviation industry. Teaching people how to maintain a precision, tooling machine is connected to the tooling machine because they exist, to which you attach the students. And they, in turn, contribute to the students. So you remember we started this thing about the structure of the economy. It doesn't have this flexibility. It is too narrow. Therefore, if you want to be a poultry farmer, we really must have sufficient poultry farms around, doing different poultries from the Sada guinea fowls.
So
other types of
I want to bring in more of the audience comments. Edith, I'll come back to you shortly. Just hold your horses for me. I see more hands. Can I get a female comment? Can I get a female comment? I'm gonna exercise my dictatorial powers very quickly, and then you move and focus on the ladies I see here. Yes.
My name is Ofake, and I'm with the persons with disability.
Good.
I think we are talking about poverty and
inequality,
but we are not talking about change of attitude. If you keep on keeping the same attitude, then we will not go anywhere. Doing the same thing at any time, we will not go anywhere. You will go to office, something that somebody is supposed to do it for you. Seeing you being disabled, they think he's doing you a favor. Seeing you being disabled, they think you have to appear with something as, hey, obi aoyare what dress to say, or utikre to me, something like that, and you will feel like being disabled, you are nobody, and something like that. Come back to attitude. If we don't change our attitude, we will not remove poverty
and inequality from the society.
Yeah.
Fantastic point. Let me hear from the ladies, and I'll take your comment. Yes. Your name?
I'm Maliha.
Okay.
Maliha Abubakar.
From? University of Ghana?
Yes.
Okay.
I actually did not plan to make any contribution today, but comments from colleagues talking about the educational system of Ghana being disconnected to the job market, looking for entrepreneurial training and all that in schools, really prompted me to say something.
So let's hear what you have to say.
For example, if we say our educational system is not connected to the world of work, or is not good enough, I beg to differ. I think we have one of the best educational systems in the world, not just in Africa. And when you come to our universities, those of us doing especially the humanities, we are taught to be generalists. We are taught to think. You cannot take your courses seriously here and not function well in any part of the world.
Since we're having a conversation about poverty and equality and inclusive growth, do you think the education has equipped you to lift yourself and break that poverty chain once you're out of school?
Yes, it has.
Okay.
But
in what ways would you say that?
let me say something.
Sure.
Robert Eastley said what? That education without incentives would not propel us out of what? Underdevelopment. Our educational system is good, but does the state or does the government of Ghana provide the incentives for us to function very well as entrepreneurs or to lift our societies and ourselves out of poverty?
Okay. That's an important point. In other words, you've graduated to school, a good education system,
Very
as you
good.
say,
Yeah.
but the opportunities are not there for you to
Very
use what
limited.
you've acquired to
Yeah.
make the most of your
I know so many young men today. You made a point earlier that the young men don't want to go into agri. And I say you are very wrong there. I have so many friends today who are into what? Poultry farming. I am from Tamale. I went back and most of my colleagues are into that. Just last week, one of my colleagues got 100,000 Ghana cedis from Edith to expand his poultry farm. You see, the problem is we do not have maybe the capital to start is a serious problem.
Yeah.
And then government set up, yes. Government sets up, is it Maslow? You go there, nobody would look at you because you don't have anything to put there or you don't have any political connection or networking to get the loan. They give the loans to themselves, or even if they say they are going to mechanize agriculture and then they are bringing in tractors, suddenly you see people who were never farmers becoming farmers.
Yeah.
And the farmers who have been farming for decades don't even get access to these tractors. They won't even give them because they are just peasant farmers. As you were saying, 2 acres of land, or even 2 plots of land, some of them farm on. And so the problem has to do with what? Incentives.
Great. Let me hear from the lady behind you. There's a lady behind you also had a hand up. Please.
All right.
Please. Yeah. Stand up and let's What's your name?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Akosei Japan. Hello, Edith.
University of Ghana?
Yes, please. University of Ghana. And I shared her sentiments to begin with, but I just wanted to comment on what we had, the submission we had earlier. And I just want to talk about perception. You see, as much as we have a situation or a climate in Ghana that is not very comfortable or is not supportive of people wanting to be entrepreneurs, to explore their skills. Sometimes, though, it goes beyond that a bit. You see, back to the educational system. I think that at the tertiary level, we have quite a good educational system, as she has totally taught us. But then, you see, I read family and consumer science. Anytime I tell someone I'm reading family and consumer science, the person says, oh, food. And clothing, and then even if you have the passion to go into that venture, right, what you do is that you want to go and read something else. And then in the end, you find yourself in a dilemma where you are not able to really translate the skills that you've acquired from that sector into something that you can use. Why? Because first and foremost, you really do not have the passion. And because you have perceived that course that you really wanted to do, like perhaps art, that someone would tell you that that's dondology you're reading, then perhaps you divert all of your skills into something else, and it doesn't really work out for you in the end. And then you conclude and say that the educational system is perhaps not the best for you, or it's not good for you. But then it all depends, sometimes, most of the times, depends on perceptions that you have. So I'm reading family and consumer science, not because I love food. In fact, I do not do food, ladies and gentlemen. So if I say it anywhere, don't ask me about food. Okay. I don't do food. But then I do things that I think I'm passionate about. I study about families. I study about resource management, and then the whole lot. And I do all of these things, plus maternal health and public health and nutrition as well. Why? Because I think that is so much in line and in tune with the things that I do. And Edith knows about the kind of advocacy I do for SRHR.
So I want to quickly get other views in. Thank you very much. And so there's a very important point that was made earlier that we haven't touched on, which is credit. The availability of credit. I want to hear from this gentleman because his hand has been up for a while. Availability of credit to young ones who will want to venture into areas of job creation, entrepreneurship, and whether the systems that we have, the structures that we have, encourage that or make that available, because that's a huge part of letting people out of poverty. We all heard about the microfinance, scams around. The government has had its own mechanisms for giving people credit, but as she said there, and that is true if you look at it, how many people are benefiting and who are the real beneficiaries of those credit schemes that we've created? Yes, sir.
I'm Kwamna Nyakotu. I work for the TUC. A quick one on the education. I left Legon 10 years ago, and I did masters in economics. I did international economics, and I never remember my tutor mentioning World Trade Organization for the whole 1 year that I did international economics. Maybe it may have changed, but clearly there's a problem with our education delivery. How can you have an education system where if you attend some of the courses, like political science, it's like NDC or MPP Mammoth Rally, people standing in the windows. It's not a good delivery, and we need to acknowledge that. But back to the poverty questions. My question to the panelists is about the definition of poverty, the way we look at it. Because if you say poverty is not having $1 a day, then probably we should stop all the analysis and give those who don't have $1 a day. I've just calculated there are about 6 million Ghanaians who don't have $1 a day. We need about $2 billion a year to take them out of the poverty. So if you define poverty that narrowly, then we are doing well. We are reducing poverty. But look at the other statistics. I just checked on joyonline.com, and it says that about 5 million Ghanaians are openly defecating. So they have $1, but they don't have toilet in their house. Are they poor or they are not poor? So we should look at the definition of poverty. The second thing I want to address is the issue of inequality. And Doc, you mentioned the issue about the wealth gap between those who are laboring and those who are owners of capital. What share of national income goes to them? And here I look at the question of interest rate. You have a country where interest rate is around 25.5%, which is about 4 times our growth rate. If you look at the Piketty index, it says that if interest rate is twice the growth rate, the economy is not sustainable. We have an interest rate at 25.5% when our growth is about 4%, almost 6 times, more than 6 times. The final
no, excuse me. I beg you. We just have 3 minutes to wrap up. So let's take the first two. Then let them wrap up with those comments. I'm grateful. I want to start with you, Edith, on that, because the last time, and then I'll hear from Doc and of course the other boss, and then we'll wrap up. Yes?
Yeah, so there were a number of comments that were mentioned. One that hasn't been addressed so far, I remember the gentleman spoke about research, and it is one of the areas that every time I hear about, I start to think a lot, because every year a lot of people get out of the universities, and one of the requirements is to do some research, and then once the research is done, it's in the libraries. Other students use what they've done to do other researches, and it goes on and on. It's the cycle of researching. But till now, and I stand to be corrected, I don't know if those research, the very good ones, actually get into the system somehow to fix the problems in society. Second, the bit about microfinancing, I remember that I had mentioned that earlier on. I talked about how, private-public partnerships have to work. Banking and finance institutions have to start to take risks, so that if I got out of university, I have no experience at all. We need to start to take risk and say that Edith has not started any business ever.
But he has a good idea. I need to invest in it.
I need to invest in her, but first build her capacity. And I think that's where we need to start.
Edith, because of time, I want to give a minute each to everybody else, so that we can wrap up properly. Mr. Graham will take his turn on this.
Kwabena, I mean, I think you are right. We should the appropriate definition of poverty now really is that it's multidimensional. It takes on issues of power, it is of issues of material conditions, and so on and so forth. And I think that needs to be injected into it, because some of the points which have been raised really pertain to power relations, not simply, kind of economic relations. So when people talk about, for example, cronyism in access to inputs, we are talking about the uses and abuses of power. And one issue that we have not discussed, which I think is a big elephant in the room, about manifestos and what people do in power. I think that if somebody did an evaluation of the percentage of public resources which are lost because of corruption, we'll probably be in a completely different place in terms of the growth of this country. So the multidimensional thing is important, and maybe we haven't discussed that sufficiently. We focus on the economics and so on, but I think you are making a valid point there.
Yes, final comment to you, sir, and then we'll wrap up. Yes, briefly, sir.
I think the new international development goals has expanded the poverty definition to no ends. It means not just access to facilities for edification, but also energy, housing, and so on. And I think it's that which makes